Hi guys, welcome to the TCL Global Podcast. This is your host Farabi Ibn Mosharraf, and we're going to talk about everything related to education here with education experts from around the world. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already and tune into this episode. Welcome back to yet another episode of the TCL Global Podcast. I'm your host, Farabi Ibn Mosharraf, and our guest today is Mr. Farabi Ibn Mosharraf. He's the team lead of partnerships in our Bangladesh office, and we are going to get into details about, I know we've all been talking about the UK a lot recently, but we're going to talk about general entry requirements for universities in multiple other countries. So why don't you introduce yourself, Farabi?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's a pleasure to be here to discuss the entry requirements for universities outside the UK. I mean, I personally studied in the UK, but I still know quite a bit about the other ones because I've been working with that.
Yeah, that's great. So why don't we just start off with UK universities? That's the TCL Global special, you know?
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, most universities have very similar entry criteria. Generally, students for the undergraduate, they'll have to complete their secondary education with qualifications such as the A-level or the International Baccalaureate or the IB. I mean, I personally had my A-levels and my offer letter literally had get this many A-levels before you can actually get in. Some universities do obviously let you use your local qualifications, and there will be some equivalency there. And generally, you'll also have to prove that you're good in English, whether you have to give something like the IELTS or the TOEFL if English isn't your first language. I had to give my TOEFL personally, and that was an experience, I will say that much.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. You know, they want to know your language proficiency, obviously, because your courses are going to be in that language. So I think one thing is correct me if I'm wrong, is the concept of statement of purpose unique to the UK, or do other countries also have that?
No, I think every single university wants to know why you're wanting to study there. So it's not just the UK. Basically, every university, whether it be in the UK or in Ireland or the US or Australia or Canada, they would want to have a statement of purpose. They want to know why you want to study there and why you want to study that subject and why that country, what you're going to do with your degree. I mean, they want to know you.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I guess maybe I should rephrase, like, is the terminology used differently? I know they call it something else in the US, I think.
Yeah, I mean, different places have different names. Some places call it a personal statement. It's a statement of purpose. At the end of the day, it's just introducing yourself to the university.
Right. So, like, you know, across different countries, they have different terms or different tests or things. But in generally, like, again, like you said, a university wants to know, you know, why you want to be there. So I think we know a lot about the UK. So why don't we move on to talking about US entry requirements?
I mean, sure. In the US, entry criteria can vary widely among universities. From different places, you might have very, very different things. But at the very least, there are certain things that every university would want. Generally, they'd want you for undergraduate, they'd want you to have completed your high school diploma or your high school education. Some universities would also ask you for a transcript directly. And if you don't have it, then you have a GED, which you then have to show. A lot of universities also want certain standardized tests, such as the ACT, the SAT, or the ACT as well as English language proficiency tests. The US is also notorious for having the most amount of written essays that they would want. I mean, you have obviously your personal statement, which needs to be strong, but they also want certain supplementary statements as well, whether it be essays, whether it be things about your life. Another thing that's usually important in the US is extracurricular activities. They very much highly regard very good extracurricular activities, whether it's been through something like debate or Model UN, or if you're more on the sporty side and you play basketball or soccer, which is what they call it there.
Yeah, I know.
So those are also very, very important there.
Right, and I think because they are more curious about sort of knowing you in a more like a well-rounded, holistic way. So does that change in any way the approach for writing a personal statement, maybe versus an SOP? Is it more informal? Can you be more personal about it,
Yeah, I mean, that's actually really fair in the sense that in the UK, if you're writing your personal statement, it's a statement of purpose. It's weird in the sense that because it says statement of purpose, they want a statement showing specifically what purpose you are using for your education, what purpose it is that you're applying to the UK and to that university. Whereas in the US, the personal statement is actually a lot more personal. I mean, I have seen written and read personal statements where people have spoken about, a friend of mine wrote about a passing of a close member of their family and how that empowered them and strengthened them when they were much younger, and how that's affecting their everyday life. A personal statement for the US is usually a lot more about themselves and it has a lot more of a personal touch. I mean, it appeals more to the emotional side rather than the very practical, objective side that the UK looks for.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to know like what each country is looking for, because maybe someone in the UK does not want you to get too personal, but someone in the US doesn't want you to be so, like, let's say, dogmatic about something. So it's interesting to see like those differences. And right above we have Canada, so let's talk about Canada. Let's knock them all out.
Yeah, I mean, Canada's a little bit in the middle in the sense of that it also requires you to have a personal statement, but doesn't need to be as personal. For undergraduate admissions, you still need to have completed your high school diploma, have completed your secondary education. Generally, you'll also need to provide your transcripts as well for the better universities. Some universities would prefer you to give an SAT or an ACT, but then they are also willing to accept things such as the A-levels and the IB. And obviously, and I think I might not have mentioned this for the US as well, but you would still have to give your English tests, whether it be the IELTS or the TOEFL, or if you're going to somewhere like Quebec or in Montreal, where there are French-speaking universities, you'd want to have something like the TEF, which shows your French proficiency, because those classes are actually taught in French.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people, I think, don't know that, but so it seems like the standardized test, the SAT, ACT, is like almost all US universities would require that, but I think, like you're saying, in Canada, not all of them, not many maybe.
No, I mean, if you have your high school transcripts and you have A-levels, generally you can use those as well. If, for example, you have a pretty good high school education and you've completed your high school diploma and then you've done your A-levels as part of your high school, you can use those as well. If you studied the IB, you can use that instead of an SAT or ACT. Although, again, certain universities might prefer that. It does depend on a case-by-case basis. The majority of universities will accept an international qualification like an A-level or an IB diploma instead.
Right, so you did mention for UK about like local qualifications, like you can get an equivalency or something. What about the US or Canada? Are they flexible about it, or how do you go about that?
I mean, for the US, it's not really as flexible. They would much prefer you give the SAT. I mean, even students who study the US system still give the SATs because
I'm sorry to interrupt. I meant like say you have finished high school in your local education. So how are you gonna get the equivalency for that?
Okay. So in those cases, I mean, if you've completed your high school in your local systems, for the UK, it's generally done on a case-by-case, university-by-university basis. Generally, I mean, the university website might have it, or you can ask one of our very talented counselors who will be able to tell you specifically what it might be, or what the equivalency might be and what scores you might need specifically. And in the certain cases, we might even have to tell you that, you'll have to give some specific test instead, some equivalency to make up for it.
Right, okay. And I guess we often forget about Down Under, but there's Australia also has a lot of wonderful universities, and I think a lot of us don't know much about what their university requirements are. Is it any different? So would you like to shed light on that? Yeah.
Australia also is very straightforward in the sense that they usually will say that it's the same thing. You'll complete your secondary education. and get something equivalent to the Australian Year 12 certificate. And what they will do is, obviously, if you haven't studied in the Australian system, they'll usually have a conversion through which you can convert your local qualification to their qualification as well. Now, again, you might have the scenario where they might not accept your local qualification and you'll have to do something about it. But in the majority of cases, that's what's going to happen. Obviously, again, they'd want to check your English scores, so they'll want you to give something like the IELTS or the TOEFL. I mean, these are all English-speaking countries, and almost universally, all of them would want to do that. And another thing is, obviously, if your local qualifications are not accepted, then you will end up having to do something called a foundation degree, which is a bridging course, which obviously in Australia, the universities have their own colleges. In Canada, you might have to do it through a private provider or the university colleges. In the UK, it's the same. Well, the US is a little bit different, where the US has private providers and you can do foundation courses or bridging courses at the university, but they might also just not allow you to study. They might not have an equivalent for a lot of universities.
Oh, all right. Well, I think it's really interesting how I think when you're an aspiring, university student, you're very nervous, like things are very black and white, but there are accommodations, there are ways to make things work, basically. Do you want to highlight any specific differences, anything maybe you didn't mention, in the general entry criteria across these countries?
I mean, at the end of the day, it just comes down to what you've studied, because for a lot of students and for a lot of us, we've spent 12, 13 years in the system, and we might not be aware or sure specifically about whether it would be accepted by the university we want to get into. So it's always best to find out more before. Especially, one thing that I would like to mention is that don't wait. You should know what the entry requirements are before you're even in your final year of education, just because you have the time to prepare. If you have to give your SATs, then you need to know, obviously, a few months before that I need to give my SATs, I should study for them. If you need to give an IELTS or a TOEFL, you'll know that, oh yeah, I should probably study for it. Or if you're confident in your English, I should at least register for it and get my results in time. So that's, I think, the big bit of advice I'd give is, especially if you're a student who's looking to study at a great university at any of these destinations, be ready, be prepared. And I mean, when you graduate, obviously, that's not the time. It's before you graduate that you should be ready for this.
So when would you say is like the ideal time that students should really start looking into everything they need to know about universities, even like before applying?
I mean, if you're a high school student, then I would suggest before you start your final year of high school, after you've completed your penultimate year, you have a bit of a summer break. I'd suggest taking that time and finding out, because if you're studying for your SATs, if you've completed your school year in July, you have to apply by maybe December, January. So you have to give your SATs in November, in October. So you have to know that, oh yeah, I'm going to be studying the next 4 months for my SATs.
Yeah, so you're right. It's really important, take that summer and really figure out what the requirements are for the universities based on the country. And I feel like we've really covered pretty much the basic requirements and criteria of each of these, like you said, wonderful destinations, and they all have so much to offer. And from what I gather, there's a lot of baseline similarities that, if you think about it, is very straightforward. They want to know if you're proficient in the English language, because you're going to be learning in that language, and they want to know why you want to go to the university. And so I think it's important for the person applying to really know why they want to go to the university, maybe look at their website or whatever. And I think for the most part, most things are straightforward, and students should not worry as much as they often do, because there's always resources. There's TCL Global, there's the internet, and that's all you need to know. And once again, if there's any last thing you would like to add, please go ahead and do so before we wrap up the episode.
I mean, no, I think I've said my piece. It's always a pleasure to share this information, and obviously our talented counselors are there to help you every step of the way. I mean, you might find a university that you didn't even know existed but would be the perfect fit for you.
Yeah.
So I hope that this would be able to guide students, and we'd be able to guide students better. And I mean, good luck.
Of course, yeah, you've been excellent. I think this would be really helpful for students, and thank you so much for your time, Farabi. It was wonderful, doing this podcast episode with you. So take care and thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
You too.
Okay. Thank you so much for watching this episode. Remember to subscribe to our channel to stay tuned for more episodes and meet amazing people in the education industry. Also, leave reviews and comments so that we can improve for you. And also follow our Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram for more study abroad content.